and at this juncture, we will check to see that we have a quorum, which I believe we do. We're scheduled until 4:45, and we will attempt to make up the time. What we're going to do this afternoon is, first of all, with the universities, review the current audit plan and get a status report on key projects. Then we will review the audit plans for 2023. Then we'll move to a NAU presentation on enterprise risk management, and then we will move to executive session. So with that, concerning the minutes, we have two of them, one from November 4 and one from 2021, and one from March 24 of this year. And do we have a second to, do we have a motion to move, let me make a motion to move those minutes, and do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstains? Okay, the motion carries. Next, we're going to get a report from Rick in regard to the Auditor General. So, Rick, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. I dropped my cane here. Okay. For the very first time in a long time, we don't have any documents from the Auditor General to review this time. They've got some projects in process, but they haven't issued any letters or reports. So we don't have any of those to review. But what I did was on the back of the executive summary for item 2, the Audit Committee, I put a list of the projects and their status that we have going on with the Auditor General. So if you have any questions, I think there's Lorenzo around here, he could probably answer. Yeah, there he is, okay. There's one other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, and that is back in 2014, under Regent Mariucci, who was Audit Committee Chair at the time, we were looking at Sarbanes-Oxley. That was a big thing. And so we went through a whole rigmarole and came up with a bunch of things that we wanted to try to do. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to mirror or model after the corporate world and have a chief auditor rotation on the audits. And so we set it up that the managing manager on each of the university audits rotates off after a 5-year period. Sometimes earlier if there's a promotion or a move otherwise. I'm happy to report that they are on schedule, and they have been ever since 2014. Mr. Chairman, that's it.
Great. Let's move to the review of the plans for 2022 and invite, first of all, ASU, that would be Morgan, and Lisa Grace. Okay, it's all yours.
Okay. We've continued to make good progress on our plan. We've completed 2 additional projects since our last meeting, as well as our Q3 remediation work. We have 6 projects in motion. I expect that we'll issue 4 of those reports by the end of the fiscal year. The other 2 should have substantial field work completed and will be issued early in fiscal year 23. Our proposed plan does have hours to account for that as well, as there generally is spillover at the end of the fiscal year. We don't have any further project changes for our plan, fiscal year 22. We are fully staffed at this point. As of last week, onboarding our new auditor. We will have another opening at the end of the fiscal year due to a planned retirement, but we're actively recruiting for that currently. As far as our completed projects go, we had 1 project on coaches, camps, and clinics, and a second project on student employment. The coaching clinic, the coaches, camps, and clinic audit was really focused on NCAA bylaws, ensuring that we're meeting those requirements, as well as ensuring that we're complying with the underlying ASU policies associated with those as the events occur, generally on ASU campuses using ASU assets. We had three significant opportunities for improvement areas identified as part of this review. One related to compliance with trademark requirements. The other two related to the facility use agreements and the fact that we have minors on campus as a result of those activities. Specifically related to the trademark and licensing agreement, the camps, as I mentioned, these are coach-owned camps, so they're operated through their LLCs. They're required to, they're allowed to use ASU marks in certain instances, but there's requirements around that to ensure that the camp activity is still marketed and portrayed as not an ASU activity. And so the audit just found that there was a lack of compliance with the key components of that item, using items such as ASU email addresses, inappropriate use of marks themselves, as well as not having the required disclosure. The second area related to the facility use agreements and minors on campus really circled around complying with the key components of employment screening related to the employees of the camps. Again, these are coach-owned camps, as well as ensuring that those employees have appropriate training as it relates to minors on campus. In both of these instances, appropriate plans have been provided, a part of the report, to address both of the issues noted and the related risks. The implementation time is fairly quick. We have September 30 dates on both of them. However, the trademark issue has essentially already been addressed. They've updated the agreements where needed, where they were missed. They've implemented workflow to address to ensure that those agreements are in place prior to the camp being approved. In addition, they've implemented ongoing monitoring to actually review the materials and ensure that they have the appropriate oversight to drive that compliance. In addition, on the facility use agreements, they're equally addressing those in an aggressive manner. They've updated the facility use agreement to include the appropriate provisions if it involves minors. They've educated the coaches as far as requirements. Again, that was part of general education already, but they did take the opportunity to reiterate that after the report. They're also working with the coaches to have to upload that support and confirmation that the controls have been met through their application that they utilize to manage the camps through the ARMS application. So again, they have a September due date. They're well on track to meet that due date. In fact, they're hoping that all camps that originate July forward will follow the new process and fully comply.
Great.
Any questions on either of those issues?
Questions? Seeing none, let's move on, Lisa.
Okay. The student employment audit really focused on the front-end processes handled by the Student Employment Office. So the posting of the positions, ensuring that we're complying with federal work study requirements, job salary ranges, posting ranges, the amount of time it has to be posted, as well as the hiring procedures, the hiring manager's procedures on the back end once the student employee is hired. No significant issues were noted of that. There were several operational areas noted related to off-campus employee requirements, as well as just general student employment training, employee screening where necessary, and some other operational issues related to FISAP supplemental reporting information.
Great.
Okay. We are monitoring 7 significant issues at this point. As you can tell by the chart included in the materials, we've already discussed 2 of those items. The other 5 we've discussed the last 2 meetings. Continued progress is being made on all 5 of those issues. The first item related to default administrator level access is in motion and scheduled to be remediated by the end of September. Initial remediation actions on that item were not successful, so they are working with the Central Technology Office to get additional support in implementing revised Active Directory structure over that area. The 3 vulnerability management issues noted, again, were related to overall governance and compliance with the vulnerability management standard, as well as reporting and ownership of the issues themselves. So they are continuing to work on those issues. This has involved implementing a new application to track our remediation action, or our vulnerabilities and the related remediation associated with them. That also has involved implementing the application, onboarding all of our distributed IT units, as well as providing training and onboarding for that application. That also is involved bringing all of the scanning in-house so that we're controlling that instead of the third party that was being utilized. So significant effort has been made into those remediation actions. They are on track to remediate that by the end of the fiscal year, early fiscal year 23 in July. We do have a planned project on the audit plan to retest those areas. Those were significant enough. We wanted a full end-to-end audit of that process again. We expect that audit will kick off late in Q1.
Great.
The final item is the chemical inventory issue. This issue involves implementing, again, a new application at the university to track our chemicals across the campuses. It also involves having a central receiving facility on campus so that when the chemicals come in, they're coded, they're implemented, or excuse me, they're input into the new application chems, and then there's appropriate tracking throughout the life cycle of that chemical. That is scheduled to be implemented early fiscal year 23. They are on plan to do that. They've implemented the application. They've completed the design of the physical changes related to the central receiving facility. They're working on hiring staff for the dedicated positions that will monitor that activity from a central receiving perspective. And they're working through their change management activities to ensure that the underlying processes have been updated, people are aware and know the new process.
The reason for this thing taking, I guess, what will turn out to be is almost 3 years is what?
So on this one specifically, the initial remediation actions were more piecemeal. So they tried several different activities to address it, including upgrading an existing system, developing some additional interfaces with Workday and our procurement system Sunrise to get the actual inventories in the system. Those activities were not successful. The initial remediation actions also did not include having a central receiving facility, and so that piece of it was still very manual. As they worked through those actions and realized it wasn't addressing the overall risk, they did step back, do an RFP to address the overall application. That initial RFP was not successful, so it was tabled again. It was at the end of last fiscal year, that the holistic approach of the new system plus the central receiving was approved, received budget funding at that point, and then they have been working to implement that process since that time period with the expected date at the end of this fiscal year.
So now this is a centralized software system that does this for the campus?
Yes, as well as, so there was always a central application, but now there's also a central receiving physical location where the chemicals are going in and are forced to go through the related process.
Great, thanks.
Overall, from an issue management perspective, we have 54 outstanding audit issues. Of those 54 issues, I just want to clarify on that represents 2 buckets of issues. One of the items is open issues, so management is still working to implement their actions to address the issue that was noted. The other issue is management remediated, where remediation actions have been implemented, but we have not yet audited to ensure that it addressed the risk and was implemented appropriately. Of our 54 issues, we have 38 of them that are open, so 38 issues are still being worked across the board from a management perspective to address the issues. Of those, 18 of them are 360 days or more past due. And so of those issues, we've already talked through 5 of them related to the significant issues that we just walked through. Other areas, other buckets where we had outstanding issues also included a construction project which has 6 open issues in there. Of that construction project, again, the remediation actions included re-implementing a portion of the web TMA system that is used for tracking the construction projects and the underlying processes associated with that. That implementation and I won't say implementation, the system's been implemented, they're just further enhancing what is being utilized in the different modules of the application to guide the process. And so that process, along with the underlying processes, has just taken longer to implement than originally expected. So the issues are still open. They do expect to have them remediated by the end of September, which will include the system piece to support the underlying process, as well as addressing the training for the existing team. I just wanted to provide that level of detail for those open items to provide more color on it's an audit issue, especially if it's related to a fundamental process or system, will take a longer time to address. It's often going to be a system implementation or along with underlying processes. That is a significant effort and will generally take a little bit of time to implement. It's not a quick task or configuration update.
You know, you and I have talked, but from the standpoint of looking at 31 projects that are taking over 360 days, on one hand, you have an immediate negative reaction because it looks like these things are super tardy. But what you're explaining, I think, is that a lot of these projects, by design, it's going to take that long, and you may be right on target.
Correct.
But it's going to show up in
Correct.
this manner. So that's something that we ought to take a look at in terms of whether we're fooling people here, because you shouldn't get slammed for some of these because basically they're on target. And software projects in particular can take a long time in terms of selecting a vendor,
Correct.
getting the vendor in, hooking it into all the existing systems so you reach for the right kind of data and the like. So
Correct.
that's something we ought to take a look at in terms of, is this chart deceiving? So,
Yeah, it might help add clarity if we provided the distinction of what truly was open versus what has been closed out from a management perspective, but just has not been
and what is
re-audited.
overdue?
Right.
Yeah,
Regional stages too, just with the project to get there. Just a little more clarity around,
Yeah.
are we on those stage gate moments would be helpful versus just a linear line that says days open.
yep,
It could be stage gates that have been accomplished moving towards that end goal.
yep,
Great.
good point.
The other area, as I said, are management remediated issues. We have 16 management remediated items. 13 are in that 360-day bucket. So again, our aging is from the date of the report. So it includes both the time that it takes to remediate the issue, plus then until we actually perform our testing to close out that issue. Of our 13 items, 7 are related to the study abroad program that we've talked in this setting last meeting as well. Those items have been remediated, but programs have been put on hold over the past 2 years. This will be the first summer that they're really having full range of faculty-led programs, which most of these issues are associated with. And so we do have planned testing activities early in the fiscal year once those programs are completed, but there's nothing to test until that activity occurs.
Great,
Okay.
good.
The remaining of the items are ready to test, so there's 6 items in that bucket ready to test. 4 of them we plan to close out as part of this fiscal year. The remaining items will just span to next fiscal year, just from a resource perspective.
Super.
Happy to answer any questions on plan status projects or open issues.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Now we'll hear from NAU, Bjorn and Mark Rupert, the Chief Audit Officer.
Hello.
I hear you just made it.
Just made it. A little delay at the Camp Verde Hill, lots of trucks in a one-lane closure.
Okay, you can take it from here.
So, Regent Herbold, welcome to the Audit Committee. Great to have you. Nice to see you all again. So in our CAE report, related to the fiscal 22 plan. You'll see 3 deferred projects. They were approved by the audit committee, just as a reminder, given we have some new members, they were approved by the audit committee at the last meeting. Primarily because we've been without staff, so I lost my team, fortunately, to the College of Business last summer, and I was able to fill 1 position, and I'm happy to say that I am planning to make an offer to 1 of 2 people next week to fill the other spot, so that's really good news. We issued the construction audit, which you'll see in the materials, and we'll discuss that as well, although there's not a lot to discuss with that one. And then we are working on student accounts currently, and we expect to close that by the end of the year, but we will start the other audit, IT security, which is on a deep dive of Linnell physical security controls. We plan to start that this June, and we'll finish that by the end of the summer. So by the end of the summer, we expect the fiscal 22 plan to be closed, and then we can move on with the fiscal 23 plan.
Super.
So of the audits issued, we had 1 outstanding audit from fiscal 21 plan on the CERT program. CERT stands for Conduct, Ethics, Reporting, and Transparency. And so in that audit report, we did identify 2 significant opportunities for improvement. The big issue is really that there's a pretty robust process for CERT, which is really about collecting conflict of commitment and conflict of interest information and trying to identify those conflicts and mitigate and manage those. The big challenge we have is we have a number of areas that are involved in the process, but none of them can make decisions on improvement. So the first significant improvement opportunity is around providing some type of oversight structure so that we can continue to mature that program and implement a lot of the changes that are listed in the report. So we didn't separate a lot of items as individual improvement opportunities because they need an oversight group to decide what's the best course of action. The second one relates to the system that's being used, which is self-built. And the programming software, PHP, right now we're behind enough versions that they're not supporting it anymore. And so there could be security concerns. So while the oversight group determines what the best course of action is, do we replace the system? Do we update what we have? Because there are third-party options out there that we can consider. ITS is going to work on making sure they get PHP updated to at least get past the security issue in the meantime. And then hopefully within 6 months or more, we'll have a lot of these things being addressed at some level. There is a meeting scheduled for June 20th amongst key individuals, key executives and so forth to start working on the oversight approach. So a lot is already in progress on these 2 significant improvement opportunities.
Got it.
And then the construction audit was a different construction audit in that the Student Athlete High Performance Center, we managed through an LLC that sort of served as an owner's representative for NAU, if you will. At least that's how we looked at it. And so our focus was not so much on deep diving into the standard ABOR program. We focused on whether or not the owner's rep, essentially the LLC, was doing its job of providing oversight. So we looked at their processes and controls and found no improvement opportunities worth reporting. So that was essentially a clean audit. I don't know if there's questions on the audits or the status of 22 plan.
I want to ask a question in regard to staffing. How long have you been down by 1?
Since October.
October.
So we've had, this is our 4th round. We did start looking at possibly bringing student employees in. One of the challenges I have is the person I hired in October is experienced and doing well, but has a lot to learn about higher education. So there's a certain amount of training, and if I was going to bring student employees, it would be constant training and turnover. So we decided to go out for a 4th round before I moved to student employees. And so I have 2 candidates. I wouldn't say they're ideal candidates. They don't really have the best experience, I would say. So I would be bringing them in most likely at an intermediate level instead of a senior level. So there's going to be a good bit of training. And when we talk about the fiscal 23 audit plan, my resources include consideration for the need for that additional training. So,
You know, in getting oriented to the audit activities in the 3 universities, you are the only one that has contracts for these auditors, employment contracts, if I understand it correctly.
yes,
And the other 2 do not. How come?
that I don't know. Unfortunately, I have to pass that on to Bjorn. I inherited that when I came to the NAU myself.
Because
so
it's
there's
my understanding
6-month,
that you've had some
renewed contracts.
negatives, pushback in regard to why do I have to sign a contract?
Yeah, we had a pretty good candidate in the 3rd round of recruiting who was we thought was definitely going to come, and when he saw that he was going to be signing a 6-month, it's really an annual contract in essence, but it's stated as a 6-month with an annual automatic renewal. He felt it was a contract job, and I could not talk him out of it. So we're all employees, we have these agreements, so you will be an employee. It's just the way we do business, so, but I couldn't convince him it was not a short-term contract job, so.
Is this used extensively at NAU, Bjorn?
Regent Herbold, yes, it's, to answer your question, service professionals have had, and if we take one step back even, there were, going back a decade, 12-month contracts in terms of employment contracts. When we went through the Great Recession, we made some modifications, and I think in conjunction with the other two universities at that point, to include language in our employment contracts to go to 6+6, which in essence means 6 months with a renewal for the second 6 months to get to the 12 months that Mark referenced, unless there's a notification of a non-renewal. So for those service professional positions, it is standard practice. Comp and class, compensation and classification review last year for our staff positions did take a look at all of our staff positions and see where they were best classified in terms of service professional versus classified staff, and there were fewer at that service professional level going forward. So that is one point. I think the question is certainly a very valid one to think about going forward, because there are differences. Not only I'll say 6+6 contract, but there's also different benefit levels as well in terms of vacation being one. Classified staff come in and they earn vacation accruals at a different level than our service professionals do. So in terms of thinking about equity between employee classifications, that is something that we should be thinking about going forward. So.
Yeah.
So, given that the job market is extraordinarily tight, and particularly in Flagstaff, this would seem to me to be probably an unnecessary barrier that you all have set up for yourselves. Was it done effectively as an expense mitigation? So to be able to non-renew somebody at 6 months for the economy to tank, and you're not then liable to pay out the remaining 6 months?
That was the move about a decade ago from that annual contract, which at that point was 12-month contract.
Right.
So yes, Regent Manson, you are correct on that. I do think that there would be something that we would need to think about related to how current employees, think about getting a contract versus not getting a contract then as well. So when we're thinking about attracting and retaining employees, the retention of current employees is something that would be front and center that we'd have to think about too in terms of any transition.
Well, it really sends a message in regard to the potential employee of, is this a company or an organization that's going to invest in me and look at me as something they want to keep, nurture, and grow? Or is this somebody who is planning to potentially sever the tie based on who knows what? So it's, Bjorn, if you would look into this, it would be greatly appreciated, because I suspect I would be surprised if other areas of NAU aren't impacted by this as well in terms of hiring. And as Chair Manson points out, hiring is very, very hard these
Sure.
days. So-
Sure. I think that it's, very, very appropriate when we're thinking about talent management, to be thinking about that. And I do believe, our sister institutions have, more classification, to be able to have more of an at-will, which, provides, more consistency with those institutions. So, good point, and, we will take that back.
Good. Mark, you want to go into some of the charts and what they're saying to you?
Sure. So second page shows our progress on outstanding improvement opportunities.
Yeah, neither of those two do.
So in the significant opportunities outstanding, there are three, two of which I've already discussed relate to the recently issued CERT report, so they're already covered. The last one relates to export control. And as a reminder, export control is legislation that regulates the export of goods, software, and technology. A lot of it relates to research, so we're trying to protect intellectual property that might have an impact negatively on the U.S. government if shared outside of the country. A lot of these relate to Department of Defense grants through research. But the issue here with the export control is that export control is not just research. So there's ITs involved. So if you, for example, if you were to decide the faculty member who is working on an export control project is going to travel, decides to take a laptop with them, we got to make sure that the intellectual property is not on there or it's properly protected according to the rules. So there's a lot of different issues like that. Procurement is a big piece of this. International education, of course, what are these students doing? Do we have foreign students who are involved in some of these projects if they shouldn't be? So there's a lot of controls that we have to worry about around the export control aspect. And so the issue at the time was that by federal rules, we have to name an individual as an export control administrator. And currently that person is identified as having the authority only for export control matters related to research. And so because we have challenges that we want to make sure we take up otherwise, the goal is to provide this individual with authority to at least ensure that these things are put in place and have some movement in there. Why is it outstanding for several years? So mostly turnover. So we lost the VP of Research shortly after the audit. The president signs that memo regarding the export control administrator. Obviously, we have a new president, and we had a couple other turnover, VP of Capital Operations who needs to be involved. So we've had this turnover, and trying to get those individuals back in place to decide what's the best course of action has been the challenge. Meeting was held yesterday, the kickoff, trying to address this issue. So hopefully we'll see this settled by the end of summer.
Great. Question, yes.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is related, just to expand, since you are doing the audit and export control and contract and government, how is the NIST apply in your audit? Because in a way, that help you to go through all the things that the government wants you to have in your audit.
So
if
you're
that will
speaking
help-
to the NIST
Yeah,
cybersecurity
NIST
framework? Or?
Well, it's not just the security, NIST is so abroad, right?
Right.
So it's the NIST SP 800-171, sorry, I know that by memory because I do government contracts. And we have to go through, NIST is, all the audit, it's not just security or
Right,
is
right.
everything, but it applies to your audit in a way, and you were talking about export control. Is that has anything to do, and maybe with all the universities, it's just getting to know how this, because you still have to get audited, and if you do government contracts, you still have to do the NIST no matter what. Because that would be like balancing, your auditing.
So in the export control audit we performed, we didn't dig deep into the IT-specific issues. So we didn't, I know I didn't apply NIST to a portion of that audit. I know the entity, in terms of when we do our ERM presentation, we'll talk about the fact that we use both the COSO and NIST frameworks in terms of addressing enterprise risk management, but our IT security function uses NIST cybersecurity framework for their IT risk assessment work. Beyond that, off the top of my head, I don't know how else NIST is applied within our information technology group.
Okay.
I don't think we have any. Steve's not here, right, or anyone, so.
Yeah, that was just a question about audit, because that's part of the audit that you go through, and now they call it CMMC, so.
So the cybersecurity maturity model, that is something that's on queue to be reviewed this year in terms of IT determining, because we're going to have to implement that at some
Yeah.
point, because it's a Department of Defense requirement.
Yeah, it is requirements in
So-
2020, so thank you. I just wanted to expand that. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we then have, we went over that, we have 23 outstanding improvement opportunities. I think Lisa did a great job of describing some of the reasons some are outstanding for so long. One additional reason, I think, is that priorities change. So for significant improvement opportunities, you're not going to see management priorities shift, impacting those as much. But for the management level improvement opportunities or the yellow items, that does happen. So, management says, yes, we think we can implement this by X date, but then priorities may shift. There's a lot of things happening, and those priorities may actually be more important than what we identified in an audit. So in some cases, that's happening as well in terms of resulting in some of these matters not being implemented as quickly as desired.
Mark, so many of the things that you folks, audit relate to information systems that provide the data that enables you to do the control work you need to do. What percent of the 15 that are so long in the tooth here, shall we say, are software related?
I unfortunately do not have an answer for that. But I can get that answer and bring it back to you.
That's usually the reason why they're so long, but generally speaking, that causes you to wonder whether the IT staffs are massively understaffed, because taking this kind of time is on something that oftentimes is really crucial in terms of representing a real flaw.
The IT function does have a formal committee that meets every Wednesday, focused on prioritizing IT projects. So everything from major changes to our ERP, PeopleSoft, down to individual departmental requests that may be ad hoc or planned in advance. So that group looks at what's needed, what's required, and has an algorithm they apply to determine priorities and so on.
So do you have enough leverage in that group?
That's a good question. I would say it this way, is one of the benefits of an audit sometimes is that it brings things to light that helps things get prioritized. That might
Yeah.
be the best way to say audit's influence. So,
Well, that's important, but like we talked with Lisa, Rick and I will take a look at this chart because it somewhat deceives, because a project that by definition is going to take, a year and a half, we shouldn't look like we're way behind simply because we're only 80% through and right on target. So this is worth some consideration, but
so one thing as a reminder is, or maybe it's new, I don't know to what depth you've got into the internal audit review board structure, but they focus a lot more on the management level. I mean, obviously the significant improvement opportunities as well, but at every IARB meeting, we go over the details of where these things are, and if things need to be pushed, that group tries to push those forward. So there is a mechanism in place to help in that regard.
so Bjorn needs to carry the flag for you.
We go back and forth. Mark, I think you should do this to get this moving, or I'll have to take care of this one.
That's good, great.
Yeah, and I'll add, just in terms of Mark's previous comment too about audit, being able to identify improvement opportunities, oftentimes, he'll ask areas, is there an area that you would like, an audit to be able to help spur improvement opportunities? So I think we do go both ways in terms of being able to utilize the audit function.
Yep. Okay. Any remaining questions for the NAU folks here? Hearing none, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll now hear from University of Arizona and Lisa Runley and Sarah Glick. Is that right? Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, you take it from here.
Okay, well, before I turn it over to Sarah, I just wanted to give you a few highlights. You have a lot of information in your packet, but I wanted to say that I'm grateful to the IARB. They remain highly engaged and are always ready to provide their expert advice. During our May meeting, we discussed strategic risks, and we made adjustments to our multi-year planning document based on that conversation. And one of the things that I thought you'd be interested in, we changed the methodology for selecting construction audits. We really looked at the need to focus on lots of different items. There's more demand for Sarah's services than we have staff hours available. So we thought that we would hone in the construction projects by focusing on projects that have a gross maximum price, or GMP, over $10 million. And there were two on the fiscal year '22 plan that didn't meet that new threshold. So IARB agreed to cancel those two audits to allow us to focus on other areas. And then we made a recommendation that we look at that threshold in the future to adjust for inflation when necessary. And then in the fiscal year '23 plan, we're going to be focusing on two specific projects. The internal audit team will continue to participate in the replacement of our enterprise financial system. We think that it's important to have audit on the ground as we implement the system, not just looking at it afterwards. And starting the Quality Assurance and Improvement Plan, or QAIP, which is an assessment of internal audits practices, and both ASU and NAU have been through this process, so we have good models to choose from. And then we'll always look at staff hours, and we've been really lucky to retain all of Sarah's team, but our part-time auditor has finally decided that she's going to retire. Sarah has convinced her over and over and over again to stay a little bit longer, but she's finally said that she'll be leaving. She was solely focused on construction audits, so since we are reducing the focus on those, we're not planning to replace that part-time position right now. And then I'm pleased to share that we continue to make progress on our audit plan, and Sarah will share that she and her team have completed one report today. That was a process review of student admissions, and happy to report there were no significant issues with that report. There were 3 yellow items or opportunities for improvement, and one of those has actually already been completed. And I'd like to give a big shout out to our partners across the university. You know, they really are diligently working on our outstanding items and have completed that one follow-up. And we only have 3 outstanding significant issues or red items. And Sarah and her team are actively working with campus on those. I'll let Sarah give you specifics on all of that in a moment, but definitely want to thank Sarah and her team for their tremendous efforts. We call them small but mighty.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm echo what Lisa said. We've got a lot going on, and I'm proud of the team for the progress they've made. They've really stepped it up this year. They've become quite a bit more productive since they've all been required to be in person.
Sarah, could you pull the microphone a little closer to you? Great.
We don't, as Lisa said, we don't work in a vacuum, so we depend upon partners across campus to help us do our job. And we've built a good rapport, and we've had good results from the campus partners. So let me get right into our materials for this meeting. Since the last meeting in March, we've issued 1 internal audit report, process review of student admissions. The key reason for this audit, it was prompted by well-known issues surrounding private colleges' admission practices across the country. And it was also a good opportunity for us to review institutional practices. This was the first time we had looked at our student admission processes. So the key risk addressed during the audit was to ensure the accuracy and compliance of admissions processes and procedures, and that students are properly admitted or denied to the university. We identified 3 opportunities for improvement, yellow items, one of which, as Lisa mentioned, has already been implemented. I mean, they had a quick target date for that one, and they were done within weeks after we issued the report, so that was exciting to see. The other 2 relate to the international admissions process, an opportunity to revise their procedures in line with current practices, and also to better align evaluation controls and processes with how they're being done for domestic undergraduate admissions.
So really what we learned from this audit is that it's important for our global admissions to emulate the best practices that we provide for our domestic students, and that it's always important to clearly document our processes and procedures, particularly for succession planning.
And then, as you know, notice on the executive summary, there were 2 issued external audit reports. SNAP-Ed, I always think of you, Regent Manson, when I see a SNAP-Ed report come through. There were no findings, Mohave County. And then the other one was the NSF virtual site visit. There were no significant issues, although the review did identify need to maybe update existing policies. There were no monetary findings either on that one.
Great.
We continue to make progress. If you look at our status, this is the best it's looked in a long time. The team is busy. We have several audits in process. I've got several draft reports to review. We're working diligently, and we're optimistically hopeful that many of these will be done by 6:30, definitely by the time the committee next meets. I'm going to jump to the charts.
Sure.
We had 3 red opportunities that are still open. 2 of them, the initial target implementation dates have passed. 1 has not. It's due next week. I'll start with the payment reconciliation. This was for the royalty payments. Since our last update in March, the university has continued to work with the third parties to effect resolution. As you know, dealing with a third party can sometimes be challenging. They're still working, and as I suggested to them, it's time to elevate to OGC, Office of General Counsel. For the annual labor basis reports, they're making really good progress on this. Again, this is one where they, since the last meeting, they did have to contact the third party. They obtained the information they need from the third party, and then it's just an internal buttoning things up so that we have a process to move forward. They were thinking that they could be done with that by 6:30, which is 6 months later than what they initially thought, but they are working on it. They're not just ignoring it. And then the sponsor benefits, while not technically due yet, they've made really good progress. They've developed the policy and the internal policy and procedure, and it's just awaiting review by a senior finance person. So they should be good to go on that one. But we are making progress, and they can speak, progress is being made. They're not just doing nothing.
On these first 2 related to Nike, how come, what are the core reasons that this thing has dragged on?
Well,
We're asking some very difficult questions, apparently.
it's not for lack of trying.
Yep. Is it personnel related?
That I don't know.
Yep.
They didn't share any of that. But I do think now it's time for additional expertise to step in and take it the next step.
Yep.
So,
I mean, this is real money flowing from these guys, so hopefully it can put the proper attention against it, but, and I'm sure you will. Okay, continue.
okay. So we had we have 18 outstanding improvement opportunities as of today. We added 3 with the process review of student admissions, and 1 was remediated, so that leaves us with 18. In terms of days open, we have 4 that are 360-plus days. I will add that between the time the report was prepared and 7/31, we have 11 outstanding improvement opportunities that are scheduled for remediation. So we'll be following up on those. The team already is pushing them. But the 4 that are 360-plus, 2 of them are included in the 11, and those were taken a little bit longer. There was system implementation involved in those. And then new federal guidance coming out that could impact the way we handle it at the university. So those 2 are on tap for July. Another one of the 4, it's develop a monitoring program within the College of Law. Their affiliated entity agreement with LCA was recently approved. I think it was in February or March. And so once the agreement was executed and in place, then it's up to them to look at the agreement and figure out how they're going to monitor what's in the executed agreement.
Yep.
So that's why that one is still open. And then the last one is IT, general controls, and a decentralized unit that has since been merged with centralized IT. And that one, while they're working on it now, they were not earlier, but they are now.
Good.
And so I think that's it. If there's any questions that
Any
anyone has.
questions? Okay, thank you very much. Why don't you stay right where you are, and let's go to tab 8, which is your 2023 plan, rather than play musical chairs and go back and forth here.
Okay. Okay. So we have a pretty robust plan for '23. The risk assessment process that we used to come up with the audit plan was we start with the multi-year risk-based planning document, and I really call it a planning document because that's where we put down what we think is coming up, and then as risks change, as priorities change, then the IARB makes decisions to shift things around. And there's a lot of ways that items get included on that plan, well, on that planning document. IARB members themselves bring risk areas to the table. We have the University Risk Oversight Committee, of which I'm a member. That is another way that risk topics come in. Then there's news articles, campus news articles, ABOR meeting agenda items. There's all different ways that I hear about other items that can come in, and I put those on that planning document for the IARB to consider. So that's really where we start. And as Lisa mentioned, at the May meeting, the committee took a deep dive on that planning document and really looked at, okay, what makes sense to do now? What, something's going on here, let's wait a little bit. And they came down with the audits that we are going to do for 2023. Boy. And it's like anything, you're dependent upon available staff to do the work. We have 5.0 FTE. Our mix of direct, which is audit related, and indirect, which is administrative, is 68 direct, 32 indirect. And while we are been told we're losing our part-time, who was really our construction contract audit expert, she has been imparting her knowledge heavily this past year or so onto another staff member. So then that individual will be able to pick up the slack, maybe not as quickly as the other one, but she has received the training, she's heavily immersed. So that should work well for us. As Lisa mentioned, we have really two focal areas for FY 2023. One is continued auditor participation in the Enterprise Financial System Implementation Project. Our auditor has been embedded in the project this year, and this year was kind of, will characterize it as kind of a slow year because it was more RFP review and selecting vendors and project management, whereas going forward now, you really get into the nuts and bolts of the implementation is actually implementing the system. So the auditor will be sitting in on implementation committees, suggesting best practices, controls that may or may not exist. He does have experience with prior system implementations, so he's well suited for this, and he is anxious to get going on this. Our other focal area is as Lisa mentioned, the implementation of a formal quality assurance and improvement program. I think I've put this on hold as long as I possibly can. NAU has had theirs, ASU has had theirs. So I'm going to leverage what they've learned and move forward with this. This is a multi-year project, from documentation of current audit methodology through external validation that results in a formal report. And that formal report will be provided to the Internal Audit Review Board and to the Audit Committee. So the plan itself includes 8 audits plus prior audit follow-up. We have 2 audits involving strategic partner agreement compliance, 2 business practices reviews, and you'll notice that both of these have been on prior year plans. Campus health and wellness has been postponed a couple of times because of their pandemic responsibilities.
Yeah.
And College of Law has been postponed a couple of times because they kept having turnover in the top finance position. But we really feel that it's important now to look at the business practices within the College of Law because of the business office support provided to the affiliated association. And then there's 2 construction contract audits. The Student Success District, as Lisa mentioned, we, as a base point, we're starting to look at construction guaranteed maximum price of at least $10 million. Student Success has a construction GMP of $60.8 million. And then the second project is the facilities management, some mouthful, relocation and consolidation facility. This one is $18.4 million construction GMP. And while the dollar amount isn't even close to Student Success, the concern or the risk, the higher risk on this one, is that the construction project has been managed by our facilities management team, and they don't normally manage construction projects. And then, last but not least, by any means, we have 2 IT security audits on the plan, a general controls review and a decentralized unit, and a third-party vendor management review.
Great.
We get a lot of help. I get a lot of help in the IARB meetings. One of the IARB members is the CIO, and so he provides suggestions as to which decentralized unit we should look at. We can thank him for the ongoing College of Science. The auditor's pulling his hair out, but okay. So that's our plan.
Very good. Questions from any of the regents? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now go back to tab 6, and we will hear from the ASU people. And in the interest of time, you get the message.
Brevity is the soul of wit.
I'm there. We continue to follow our three-year cycle for our risk assessment process. I won't, in the interest of time, I won't go through that since we did review that at the last meeting as part of our enterprise risk management program, so I will skip over that. This year's process really included formalizing our enterprise risk management approach that we discussed in March, the risk assessment process that internal audit does on an annual basis, input from our internal audit review board, as well as senior leaders across the university, as well as direct input from our operational teams that are responsible really for monitoring the environment for real-time risks that would impact the overall environment or the overall university. The output of all of those processes were really a direct input into the creation of our audit plan. Our audit plan assumptions remain consistent from prior years. We have 5 FTEs, including myself. Approximately 57% of our time is allocated directly to specific reports that are part of our status updates, both assurance projects, as well as advisory projects, as well as our remediation work. The remaining time represents paid time off, management oversight, management of our compliance and ethics hotline, our ongoing efforts for our quality assurance program that Sarah just talked about, as well as a small bucket of administration time. Our plan this year, the composition of that plan consists of 15% focused on compliance-based projects. Those are in the areas of conflict of interest, conflict of commitment. 17% focused on financial projects, including contracting and signing authority, and asset management. 41% is focused on operational projects, including areas of vendor management, employee recruiting, employee training, employee termination processes, a strategic partner review of our Follett agreement, who manages our bookstore, the student bookstores, as well as continuity of operations from a unit level. 27% of our plan is focused on IT projects, vulnerability management, which I referred to earlier, security controls related to Internet of Things on campus, as well as an application review focused on the KIMS application related to the chemical inventory issue we discussed. We also have one project that is unplanned so that we can be responsive to management requests as they come throughout the year. I feel our proposed plan really directly supports our enterprise risk program. It's really focused on those underlying mitigating processes and controls that are in place to ensure that we're effectively addressing those risks. Our plan was reviewed with the IRB at the end of April, as well as with President Crow, and was approved with minor modifications. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the process or the plan.
Questions? Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
You're welcome.
Now we'll do NAU, Mark and Bjorn. Okay,
So fiscal year '23 plan, you'll see the first several pages of the document focus on how we align the plan with our enterprise risk management program to ensure that audits take into consideration the top risks facing the university where possible. Not always do audits make sense in relative to certain risks, but I think we're covering 6 of the top 7 that we'll get into more detail in the risk piece in executive session. About 60% of our plan is focused on assurance audit projects, 20 on consulting, and 20 on admin training type topics. So in the plan itself, we have 5 planned audits. One begins our 4-year cycle for NCAA bylaw compliance audits. So we break up those bylaws over 3 years, and then we give athletics a break for a year. They had their break last year, so this year we kick into gear. We have an IT security audit. We don't specify what that will be most likely in this cycle. It will be a focus on some aspect of cloud security. But as we get close to when we start the audit, we usually take another look at IT's risk assessment as well as any changes in ERM, and then refocus on what we think would be the best approach at that given time. And also look at, are there consulting projects, perhaps other audits we would not want to duplicate efforts or overstep bounds, if you will. We're also going to look at preventive maintenance and deferred maintenance. So that's the third audit. We then have research indirect costs. We had planned to audit in fiscal '22. That was one of the projects deferred. So we're going to restart that project going into the year. And I'm trying to remember the fifth. I lost my stats here. Contracting. So we've been wanting to look at the contracting process for the university for quite a while. Made the plan this time. We have 2 consulting projects, one on data integrity. So the goal there in consulting is that we have a data governance model, and that part of the focus of that data governance model is identifying data integrity issues and then looking into what processes affect those. So our goal is to help, given that resources are tight, we're going to use some of our resources to help in that regard, which will also educate my team on that data, which we can then use in future audits. So we consider that a win-win. Business process efficiency is a continuation of what we started this year. Right now, one of the processes that we're reviewing is the facilities work order process. So it sounds like Lisa's team is doing some of that as well. We also have the web TMA system, but we want to look into, over the years, there's been complaints about costs, time overruns, so we want to find out, why is that happening with a lot of these maintenance work orders and so on. And so that will be a good lead into when we start preventive maintenance, deferred maintenance audit, because we'll already have that understanding of the whole process by the time we get in. So.
In regard to the IT security and data integrity entries that you have in your list for this year, or for next year, I should say, how centralized is data activity and systems activity at the university, which, if it's decentralized significantly, these areas are very challenging. So how much, this is probably a question for Bjorn. Tell me about how that is structured at NAU.
So Regent Herbold, IT is centralized overall at NAU. So when we work with our CIO and CISO, they maintain a very good oversight across the university for IT security, and Mark works very closely with them to identify which areas from their risk assessment should be monitored. So that is a key factor and one of the key I think mitigating factors in terms of maintaining our risk preparation for that.
Yeah.
And we do have a centralized data warehouse, that provides data into business objects reports or Tableau dashboards. So we try to maintain good consistency within that data itself.
Very helpful. You're lucky, because that could be a super problem. In fact, I guess at University of Arizona, this is one of the things that we're trying to clean up a bit. That's probably an understatement. So,
The other aspect to that, if I can add, is you can't really centralize all data because people enter data all over the place. IT security started a data inventory process 3 years ago. We actually touched on some of that in our shadow IT audits from the past. And so the goal of that data inventory is to understand where data is being collected, what type, so we can fit it into classifications. We have 4 classifications for data, so we know how to protect different data. So that's an additional add-on to what Bjorn explained.
other questions that might emerge from the committee members here, or from the regents in general? Okay, hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
What we will do now as a committee is simply vote on all 3 of these together. So what we're approving, hopefully, is the 3 audit plans for 2023 that we just heard about. So I will move that we approve these. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Against it, nay. Abstains? Nope. Thank you. All set.
Thank you.
Very good. I think Jennifer has the next item here. Which is a IT security policy change that she will review.
Thank you, Regent Herbold. Regent Herbold, members of the committee, the board office asks the committee to review and forward to the full board for first reading revisions to ABOR Policy 9-202, which are university responsibilities related to IT security, as described in the executive summary. Just as some background, the proposed revisions to this policy are intended to implement the final recommendations left for the Auditor General's Office IT security performance audit that was conducted. In particular, the Auditor General's Office had recommended expanding ABOR's governance and oversight of universities' IT security practices, including in the areas of requiring universities to monitor and regularly report to ABOR on IT security program effectiveness, as well as reviewing the results of universities' IT risk assessments. And they also recommended doing this by using ABOR's current processes. So these policies are intended to implement that. The reporting function will come through the audit committee. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
So from the standpoint of the way we currently do things, this is not going to force big changes.
The reporting function is being enhanced. So we currently have in place IT security policies and guidelines. These update those policies, and they enhance, with regard to the IT security program, the minimum elements that the programs have to have. And it also enhances the monitoring and reporting function to the board, so that the board is aware of the practices that the universities engage in with regard to IT security. And those reports will come back annually to the audit committee.
Very good. Any questions for Jennifer? So I would move that we forward to the full board the approval of ABOR Policy 9-202 in regard to IT security. So is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Say aye. Those against, nay. Very good. It passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So at this juncture, we've seen presentations from University of Arizona as well as ASU on enterprise risk management. Jennifer, we're going to do that in this meeting, or?
Yes, there are
executive
two
session.
components of the risk
Yep.
management. You've got the public presentation
Okay.
and an executive session on it.
Very good. Mark?
Give me a second to make sure I can work the clicker properly. I think we're good. You want to control it for you?
So Regent Herbold, members of the committee, Mark and I will provide the overview of NAU's process and structure and approach for enterprise risk management. And then we will be joined in executive session by Becky McGaw, seated over to my left, Associate Vice President, Chief Risk Officer, and Chief Procurement Officer. And we will go through further details at that point.
Great.
So at this point, I've got a couple slides here that just really sets us a foundation for NAU in terms of how structure helps look at risk, manage risk, and approach risk at NAU. And it starts with just the overall leadership team and how that leadership team covers key units across the university and informed by university-wide advisory boards. I mentioned earlier today in the Finance, Capital, and Resources Committee a University Budget Advisory Board. That is a new budget advisory board that just kicked off here this spring and will continue going forward, that will really look at key issues surrounding resources and budgeting, including enrollment and tuition revenue. We also have a budget or a university advisory board to take a look at key issues and think about how those issues involve and intersect with risk. So we have university advisory boards, and we also have a number of risk oversight groups. IARB being one, which you've heard that acronym a number of times here. That is certainly a key function here at the NAU, as well as our two sister institutions. ERMOC, which is another acronym that you can see here. Mark will look at what that committee does, who is on that committee in a couple slides. We have an emergency management advisory group that really takes a look at incidents, whether it's a incident such as a snow emergency or another emergency. We run tabletop exercises with that group that really focuses in on how we respond to emergencies. And then, as I mentioned, Becky McGaw and her team, when contracting, purchasing, risk management, really takes a look at that risk management function, interacts with the state with the risk management program. So we have a number of groups across campus that look at risk. We also have functional groups such as finance. We've talked about IT and the need to have IT and our IT centralized does give us a key oversight lever across the university looking at IT security. Purchasing takes a look at all contracts and tries to make sure that we have the best terms for those contracts that NAU can have, not only for fiscal responsibility, but also thinking about how those align with any regulatory issues for contracts too. We have a number of compliance functions. We already have noted in this meeting the CERT program and the fact that we need to look at conflicts of interest and how the varying groups across campus can work together to make sure that we have proper oversight. But that's just one example. We also have a number of things with our HIPAA compliance and research compliance and human resources. So all of these different, whether they're functional structures or organizational structures or groups, give NAU a just foundation in terms of how they can manage and risk mitigation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and he's going to take a look at ERMOC.
So I'll really get into the, I'll get into the enterprise risk management approach. So we formalized ERM really in 2019, but it started as a grassroots efforts. And Regent wanted to speak to your question about NIST. It really started by myself and Michael Zimmer, our Chief Information Security Officer, because we both need to do risk assessments. And we thought, does this make sense? And while IT will continue to do detailed risk assessments, we moved our look at risk based on the new ERM process. So we started this really in 2018, ultimately made a proposal to Bjorn and our CIO, Dr. Burrell, which they latched onto, and we created the Erm Oversight Committee in 2019. That's very important given my involvement because by standards, I can't actually manage ERM. I can help facilitate, I can be part of the process, I can use the data. But so this committee ensured that I wasn't suddenly the chair and running the ERM program. So we have a number of key individuals as listed here. I don't need to necessarily speak to each one, although for Michelle Parker, I will say that general counsel is on the committee only for advice and counsel. So I think that's probably important to note. So from there, we primarily focus on the COSO framework for ERM, but there's also the NIST component. So like I said, Michael and I focused really on both of those frameworks to help drive how we structured this. It's important to understand the definition of risk. For instance, if you Google risk, you're going to get 49 million hits. So there's a lot of different ways people look at risk. So it's important that as an entity, we focus on a common definition. And that common definition is here per COSO, which is events that impact our ability to meet objectives. For us at NAU, we focus very much on both aspects of risk, the upside challenges and the downside challenges and the upside opportunities. And we feel it's important to ensure we understand the opportunity aspect just as much. So the other key component is, well, what's ERM then? We have to have a common understanding of risk. We also have to understand what we're trying to achieve with ERM. So these are key points, again, from the COSO model. So it's very strategy aligned. So everything we try to do with ERM is ensure we understand how our risks relate back to the NAU strategy. It's culture. So ultimately, our goal is not just to have executive team focused on risk, but the entire organization understand the need to consider risk in decision making. And so that's really the final key of ERM, is it's really focused on how do we ensure that risk is considered in decision-making, because decisions are what make or break the organization ultimately. So we want to ensure we consider those risks. So this
Mark,
is.
make
Yes.
sure we move along.
Okay, sorry. So this is our process, real quick. So starting at the top, again, risk very much aligned to strategy. We go through a process of identifying and understanding the nature of those risks. This is very similar to what you've seen 2 other times so far. We determine the risk impact and likelihood, so how likely is to occur and what would the impact likely be, and then how do we prioritize those risks. The other aspect of that is ensuring that we're not focused on issues. Issues are things happening now. So a pandemic was a risk. COVID became an issue. That was a risk, a black swan, in fact. Ultimately, then we go to, well, what do we do about it? So we want to own that risk first, and then we want to determine a risk action plan. How do we respond and mitigate that risk? And then we evaluate how the risk action plans worked, and we update our risk data, and it's essentially a cycle. So just to dig into that a little bit more, one thing about risk that we focus on is its internal or external influence. So things that are internally influenced, we have a lot more control over how we mitigate those risks. So it's important that we understand that difference. External events like a pandemic, government regulations, we have less control over, but we need to figure out how might we respond should they occur. And then the impact, we look at 8 factors in our current model. 2 of those are very important: reputation and strategic goal alignment. So we look at impact and probability related to these categories in the essentially mathematical model that calculates risk scores. And then probability, of course, is the likelihood, and then ultimately who's going to own that risk. And so our goal is to ensure for all of those NAU-wide risks that there's an executive who is accountable for making sure that we do things to mitigate that risk. You're familiar with this chart. In fact, this is the same chart that U of A uses, so it just shows the way the prioritized risks. So in this particular view of a heat map, as it would be called, you'd have 4 quadrants. The upper right would be those things that have the highest impact, the highest probability of occurring, and of course, we do a lot more review. And so as you go down through that, as you get into the green, the lower left, then of course it's less frequent or none at all in some cases, depending on how minor the risk might be. So then the risk-based decision process, if it's not an opportunity, which of course we'd seek to optimize, and it's a challenge, we're going to accept that if we have no choice. So NAU Flagstaff is in a geographical area made up of 7 dead volcanoes. We assume and hope they're dead, so we have to accept that risk. We can eliminate them, so in those cases, we might divest of a program or a function, that type of thing. We can mitigate, which is the most common thing we do, which is implementing changes in strategy, policy, and process. And then ultimately, we can transfer. Financial risk we would transfer through insurance, operational perhaps through co-sourcing and ventures and other relationships that help share that risk. And that's our program.
Excellent. This process is really valuable, and it should lead to excellent input to your plan for 2023 and in the future. So it's highly valuable that we institutionalize this process. So with that, are there questions from the regents? Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're now going to adjourn, and
Regent Herbold,
yes,
we're going to recess into executive session and we'll adjourn after exec session.
okay, excuse me. Yeah. We'll now recess to, or whatever Jennifer likes to call it, over to executive session.
We need a vote.
If you just want to take a vote.
You need to motion and.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
So we're going to move that we move to executive session, and I would look for a second.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? I can't imagine. Thank you.
Those against is just going home.